Coming up today on the Nick Craig Show, Representative Jennifer Balkcom from the North Carolina General Assembly will be the congressional nominee in North Carolina's 11th congressional district. We'll get into the details on that. Plus, Joe Scarborough loses his mind over what he believes to be the Democrats fumbling the bag as we get closer to the midterm elections. We'll have all the details coming up. And a good Tuesday morning to you. Welcome into the Nick Craig Show, streaming live this morning on YouTube, Rumble, X, and Facebook. Don't forget that you can take the show with you 24/7 on demand. It is real simple and totally free to do. Just search for the Nick Craig Show in your favorite podcast app. You can also listen online by visiting the website nickcraig.com. Our program this morning brought to you by Melissa Gott and the team over at the Law Group here in Wilmington. For any legal questions or challenges, visit them online at lawgroupnc.com. We'll hear more from them coming up in a little bit, just a little bit later on in the program this morning. A story that we have been tracking for the last week, the controversy, the drama, the last-minute nature of everything unfolding in North Carolina's 11th congressional district. And while things will continue to unfold out there, we do have some clarity moving forward now after a meeting that took place last night in Balkcom County as the Executive Committee of North Carolina's 11th congressional district GOP met to determine who their candidate was going to be moving forward, and they have selected Representative Jennifer Balkcom. The Republican from Henderson County was selected by about 51 members of that executive committee at that meeting in Balkcom County last night. This was a first ballot vote, meaning there was just one ballot that took place. Balkcom was the clear winner of that contest. She has now been officially nominated by the executive committee in the 11th congressional district and will go on as the Republican nominee. As we approach the November election, she will battle against Democrat Jamie Ager, who has been gaining a lot of momentum, has been raising a lot of money, and is set to make an interesting run for that seat. We'll get into some of the past election results in North Carolina's 11th congressional district. There's obviously no surprise here over the last week. Been a lot of talk about, are the Republicans going to lose this seat? It is a midterm election year. Obviously, the Chuck Edwards report that came out from the House Ethics Committee painting very inappropriate conversations and situations with young female staffers in his office, creating a very toxic, a very hostile work environment, skipping votes on the House floor so that he could decorate Christmas trees with his 19-year-old staffers. Just a very bizarre and odd situation, opening the door here for the potential for a Democrat to flip that seat. I'll have some of the numbers on that coming up here in just a bit, so stay tuned for that. But this meeting, again, taking place last night, Balkcom releasing a statement shortly after the meeting saying, in part, "I'm blessed to receive the Republican nomination for the 11th congressional district. Western North Carolina is where I was born, raised, and chose to raise my own family. It has been an incredible honor to fight for Henderson County in Raleigh." That's the county she represents in the North Carolina General Assembly. "And I will take that fight to Washington and work every single day to make life more affordable for working families, improve community safety, support our farmers, and ensure we have the resources we need to continue to recover from Hurricane Helene." Some interesting information discussed before and after. Prior to 2016, Representative Balkcom, well, she wasn't a representative at the time, but now Representative Balkcom was actually a Democrat. And so after this vote, of course, a lot of speculation online being questioned. What's going on here? Is this a sheep in a wolf's clothing? Like what exactly is happening with this? Well, she addressed that in her statement after the nomination last night and was very blunt about what caused her to switch her party affiliation in 2016, like so many others. She wrote, "Like many Americans, the Democrat Party left me behind when they abandoned their values and embraced extremism. We are seeing that extremism play out across the country as their party nominates radical socialists who want to raise taxes, open our borders, and do away with our way of life. We must prevent that radical agenda from reaching our government, and that starts right here in the 11th District. This is a story that is one, I would argue, that's relatively common. I mean, if you go back, and I know it was a long time ago, and so this stuff is a little bit distant in our memory at this point, but you go back to 2015, 2016, when you had this race taking place, or the beginning of the contest between President Donald Trump and then at the time Hillary Clinton. And this was a very large conversation where you had many individuals who had come to the realization, and this, let's be honest, this was a slow kind of gradual creep, but a lot of people that said, reflected and looked back and said, who is this party that I'm associated with? Many of these individuals, lifelong Democrats, and this is especially relevant in a state like North Carolina that prior to 2010 was controlled by Democrats for more than 100 years prior to that, being a Republican and holding office as a Republican in 2016 was still a relatively new thing. Yes, there had been Republicans in the General Assembly. Yes, there had been Republicans in the Council of State, but Democrats literally controlled the state for more than a century beforehand. It was a one-party state. It was single-party rule in North Carolina for a very, very long time. And so you had a lot of individuals who grew up, all of their family were Democrats. Democrats controlled North Carolina. And it wasn't until you got to 2010, 2012, 14, and 16 that this gradual change not only started taking place, but I think a lot of folks finally decided, all right, it's time to jump ship here. All right, this party, the Democrat Party that I've been registered with for 30 or 40 or even 50 years is no longer representing me. The ideas, the values that they stand for, the things in which they are fighting for on a day in and day out basis, they don't align with me. They don't represent me. These are not issues that I am passionate about. These are not things that I want to see advanced. And so you did have this kind of great migration, especially here in North Carolina over the last 20 years, where the Democratic Party's voter registration has tanked. For, again, going back to prior to 2010, this was a state exclusively dominated by Democrats. Since 2010, over the last 16 years, we have seen Democrat Party registration drop significantly in this state to the point now where there are now more registered Republicans than there are Democrats in North Carolina. That is a monumental change. And as the commentary there, the quote there from Representative Jennifer Balkcom released last night after she received the nomination from the Executive Committee, she hits it right on the head. Their values and embraced extremism. That is exactly what is going on right now. I've got a clip that we'll get to towards the end of the program from Joe Scarborough. He lost it on MSNBC yesterday morning, or MS Now, excuse me, on his program yesterday morning about this very same thing, about this extremism that is taking place within the Democrat Party right now. These awful, terrible, miserable ideas that Democrats are pushing forward in a year that should be, for the most part, a relative cakewalk for them. This is a midterm election with Donald Trump in the Oval Office, an incredibly divisive political figure. Democrats hate this guy more than you can possibly imagine. This should be a great year for Democrats, not only in North Carolina, but across the nation. And they are potentially, and I'm not making an election prediction, let me make that clear. This is not a prediction. But they have the potential to squander what should be a very good year for them, not because of any sort of other factor besides their ideas are insane. The things that they are pushing, the ideas that they are trying to jam down the throats of the American populace are incredibly unpopular. And this is stuff that you are seeing in states that are swing states like North Carolina. And so it's going to be fascinating to watch as a lot of these conversations continue to play out over the next 80-something days as we approach the November election. It's going to be absolutely fascinating to watch. We are continuing with the big news out of Western North Carolina last night. It was the NC-11 GOP Executive Committee that gathered at the Balkcom County GOP office to determine who their candidate was going to be for U.S. Congress. This comes a little less than a week after an announcement, a surprise announcement from Congressman Chuck Edwards that he was not going to resign his seat, but that he would not be seeking re-election in November. This comes after a March primary in which he beat his opponent Adam Smith by about 40 percentage points, a dominant primary victory. Last Monday, it was a House Ethics Committee report that painted a troubling light moving forward for Congressman Edwards, detailing and describing inappropriate activity with young female staffers in his office. It was 36 hours after that, very early Wednesday morning, 3:30 a.m. to be exact, when Congressman Edwards took to social media to announce that he was out, and a scramble ensued in Western North Carolina to determine who their candidate would be. It is getting late. One of my favorite phrases is it's getting late early, and that's exactly the case here. Early voting kicking off in North Carolina on October the 15th, Election Day rolling around on Tuesday, November the 3rd, and so they had to act very quickly, and that is exactly what they did last night as Jennifer Balkcom, the Republican from Henderson County, has been selected by the Executive Committee of the Republican Party to be their nominee moving forward. Reading through a part of her statement, she wrapped up by saying, "Rest assured, I will work every single day between now and Election Day to earn the votes of our friends and neighbors. Our region is incredibly strong and resilient, and I plan to be the fighter everyone who calls Western North Carolina home, and then what they deserve." We have seen some other reaction coming in as well. U.S. Senator, Ted Budd took to social media just minutes after the meeting on Monday evening to throw his endorsement behind Balkcom, posting, "Jennifer Balkcom fights every day for the people of Western North Carolina. Whether it's disaster recovery, supporting farmers, or standing up for women and girls, I am endorsing Jennifer because she'll bring the values and strengths of Western North Carolina to D.C., work to grow our economy, and always stand up for NC-11. Representative Balkcom was one of the individuals that really championed legislation that we saw here in North Carolina back just a couple of years ago to do the very controversial thing of protecting female sports. One of the issues that the Democrat Party continues to double, triple, quadruple down on, this very stupid and dangerous idea of not being able to define what a woman is and be able to determine whether or not female athletes, young female athletes, should have the ability to play in a sports league in which they are protected from biological males who, of course, are physically very different. You see that play out in professional sports. A lot of drama going on right now in the WNBA as a couple of male players have announced that they want to be part of the WNBA draft next year, really throwing that league and all of the woke leftists that run it in a very uncomfortable situation because, of course, they can't define what a woman is. They can't really define what it means to be a woman, really backing them into a corner. I've got some stuff on that. Hopefully we can get to that later on in the week or early next week as that continues to unfold. But here in North Carolina, Representative Balkcom, one of the champions of this issue, an 80-20, a 90-10, maybe even a 95-5 political issue, which is let's make sure that we protect female sports. She championed that in the North Carolina General Assembly and was able to get that legislation over the finish line. So let's zoom out a little bit on this race because there's been a lot of discussion, a lot of speculation. Can a Republican win? Jamie Ager, the Democrat in this candidate, who is a farmer from Western North Carolina, to his credit, has done a phenomenal job fundraising, has been very successful in his election operations thus far. Currently, or at least previously, had been outraising Chuck Edwards by a ratio of 9-1. So very strong fundraising numbers for the Democrat in Jamie Ager. But just taking a little bit of a step back, this is an area in North Carolina in which Republicans have had some very strong success. Looking at the 2024 election here in North Carolina, President Donald Trump secured 53.96% of the vote in 2024 in the 11th Congressional District, compared to Kamala Harris, the then vice president, who received just 44.49% of the vote. That is almost a 9.5 percentage point advantage for President Donald Trump in the presidential contest throughout the 11th Congressional District in 2024. We go over to the race that Chuck Edwards ran in 2024, in which he beat the Democrat in Caleb Rudow in that contest, 56.8 to 43.2. That is a more than 13.5 percentage point advantage for Edwards in that contest, in the exact same congressional district that we are going to see taking place this year. All of this to say, and not an election prediction, but all of this to say, this is an area of North Carolina that relatively recently, I think it's fair to say that the 2024 election was pretty recent. The last time we had congressional elections and a presidential election, this is an area of the state that does remain pretty red. Now, that does not mean that Jamie Ager can't win. That does not mean that Jennifer Balkcom, her supporters, and the Republicans in Western North Carolina can just cruise control this thing to a victory. No, it's going to be a tough election. Jamie Ager is a formidable candidate. But let's not pretend that this is some close swing district, because it's not. Now, I know that there's some reports out there. There's some different ratings out there that have in recent months indicated that this could be a more closely contested race. And while, that everybody has their own right to determine that, and these various surveys and studies look at all of this various information, it is pretty clear and obvious to me here that Republicans continue to have a pretty significant advantage. Even looking at the Cook Political Index, the Cook PVI for North Carolina's 11th Congressional District, they have this race at an R+5 even in this midterm election year. That is a seat that should be relatively safe for Republicans. Now, obviously, there's a lot of factors here. This is a very short timeline for Jennifer Balkcom. She is a representative in just one of the 16 counties in Western North Carolina. She is the House rep for Henderson County. There are 16 counties that make up North Carolina's 11th Congressional District, and geographically, it is one of the largest regions in the state. It spans all the way from the Georgia-Tennessee border to portions of what would be close to be describing the Piedmont region in central North Carolina. So it's a large region. There is a relatively short time frame, a relatively short runway here for Representative Balkcom and the Republicans. Fortunately for her, she has served 2 terms in the North Carolina General Assembly, has some pretty strong name ID, and has a record of fighting for the people in Western North Carolina. We have reached out to Representative Balkcom. As you can imagine, she is going to be very busy over the next couple of months, and extended an invite to get her here on the program. Hopefully, she is able to do that in the days or weeks to come as we get ever closer to this election coming up in March. I've got a couple of final thoughts I'll get into on this NC-11 race. We'll have those details coming up here in just a couple of minutes. But before that, I want to tell you about the law group here in Wilmington, to thank Melissa Gott and her team for their continued support of the program, and remind you that when legal challenges arise, make sure you put your trust in the law group right here in Wilmington. Since 2003, their experienced attorneys have continually provided high-quality, affordable legal services across the eastern half of our state. Whether you're facing a divorce, navigating a real estate transaction, or maybe you're in a position where you need a strong defense, no matter the issue, the law group has your back. Their dedicated team ensures your questions are answered and issues are resolved as quickly as possible. Great news, folks. They're located in downtown Wilmington and just a phone call away at 910-251-6088, or you can visit them online at lawgroupnc.com. That's 910-251-6088, or online at lawgroupnc.com. It's the Law Group. Experience and dedication you can rely on. We appreciate Melissa Gott and her team's continued support here of the Nick Craig Show. All right, on the other side, wrapping up the conversation on NC-11, plus we'll get to a very interesting clip from Joe Scarborough on MSNBC yesterday, in which he tore into the Democrat Party. We'll have those details as the Nick Craig Show continues, streaming live this Tuesday morning on YouTube, Rumble, X, Facebook, and available 24/7 wherever you get your podcasts. And a good Tuesday to you. Welcome back to the Nick Craig Show, recapping the big news in North Carolina today. A meeting from the North Carolina GOP's 11th Congressional District Executive Committee last night in Balkcom County led to the nomination of Representative Jennifer Balkcom, the Republican from Henderson County. She will battle against Democrat Jamie Ager in the upcoming midterm election, which will be here before you know it. Blink a couple of times and we'll be in early October, just days away from the start of early voting. And then, of course, Election Day rolling around coming up here in early November. This is a very compressed, a very short, a very tight timeline for anybody. But as just mentioned before the break, this is a district that has been controlled pretty handily by Republicans, in recent years. Trump won it by almost 9.5 percentage points in 2024. Congressman Chuck Edwards beat his Democrat opponent in 2024 by 13.6%. And so this is an area of the state that is pretty solidly red. That doesn't mean that a Democrat can't win. That does not mean that for Jennifer Balkcom and for the Republicans, this is an easy race. It's not. This is a very short time frame. Elections like this are hard every single year. You add on top of that this very compressed timeline, less than 80 days ahead, less than 85 days, ahead of Election Day. And this is a very much a tough contest and a tough battle. Representative Balkcom has served 2 terms in the North Carolina General Assembly representing Henderson County. She championed and what is one of the leading voices on legislation back just a couple of years ago to protect female sports here in North Carolina, as Democrats and those on the political left thought it was a good idea to allow biological men to participate in women's sports. It was Representative Jennifer Balkcom and some of her other colleagues, including Representative Tricia Cotham in the North Carolina House, who stood up against that and championed legislation to do the very controversial thing of protecting female sports. So all of this to be said, this is going to be an interesting race to watch. Democrat Jamie Ager has raised a lot of money, has been running from all accounts, and from what I've seen, a pretty strong campaign in Western North Carolina. Fortunately, the meeting was relatively simple from all accounts and individuals I've spoken to that were there. 90 minutes, there were 6 candidates. All of them had the opportunity to speak, and when it was said and done, Representative Balkcom won handedly in the first ballot election in that contest. There appears to be very strong unity amongst Republicans across North Carolina's 11th congressional district. And, well, there is no time for infighting, no time to go back and forth. She is the candidate, and it is going to be incumbent on Republicans in the western half of the state and really across North Carolina as a whole to rally behind her in this very short time frame to guarantee an election victory for her. We'll be keeping a very close eye on that race in Western North Carolina as we keep track of all of the happenings leading up to the midterm election. I teased at the beginning of the show a very interesting clip that I caught on social media yesterday. It included Joe Scarborough. He has been the host of the Morning Joe program on what used to be MSNBC, is now MS Now. And every once in a while, for old Joe Scarborough, he says a couple of things that make a lot of sense. Now, I'll admit I'm not a frequent watcher of the program, but you'll see a couple of times a month a clip of his, a comment of his kind of turns and goes viral on social media. And so there was a very lengthy segment on the Morning Joe program yesterday in which Joe Scarborough was really tearing into the Democratic Socialists of America, the DSA, and a very popular online influencer and live streamer by the name of Hassan Piker. Why is this the case? Not because Joe Scarborough has woken up and has determined that he has been wrong about the vast majority of his political ideas and ideologies and is all of a sudden becoming a tried and true conservative. No, because he understands, I think, that in a midterm election year, of which we are approaching coming up here in November, with exclusive Republican control in Washington, D.C., Donald Trump in the Oval Office, Republicans holding the majority in the House, Republicans holding the majority in the Senate, this should be, by all accounts, all historical evidence, everything would point to the fact that Democrats should have a banner year here in 2026. Because Joe Scarborough has been around this long enough, former member of Congress, some very interesting controversy with a staffer in his office that caused him to leave there and go into the media landscape, he seemingly understands that if Democrats continue this DSA socialist far left push that we continue to hear about and we continue to see candidates winning. We just saw it in Michigan over the weekend. We saw it with the Graham Plattner situation unfolding in Maine over the last couple of weeks as well, that they are potentially breaking the norm, that being the Democrat Party, breaking the norm in what should be a very successful year for them and teed off on the Democrat Party and some of their crazy ideas. Take a listen to just a little bit of this.
Why are we talking about DSA now? Because the Democratic Party has a choice to make. Now, I said this day in and day out leading up to Kamala Harris's election. You couldn't watch an NFL game without seeing 300 taxpayers are going to pay for trans surgeries for convicts ads on NFL games. And even though they still pretend, that did not move viewers. I think the Trump campaign spent $30 million on those ads, and it moved working class men, working class white men, working class black men,
or it kept them where
working
they are.
Class Hispanic men. It just did. And the Democrats had their head in the sand. So there's nothing wrong with the Democrats supporting economic justice. There's nothing wrong with the Democrats supporting, cutting taxes or getting rid of the Trump taxes and making billionaires pay more in taxes. That's legitimate. That's a legitimate mainstream debate for people to have. Health care for all. Health care is unaffordable. That is something most Americans would agree with. But please, I don't need people telling me, oh, you have to just turn a blind eye to people saying that women getting raped on October 7th didn't matter in the grand scheme of things. No, Americans aren't going to support that. This is not about me. This is about the Democrats, once again, fumbling the football on the 2-yard line when they have a chance to make great gains, but being so woke, I don't know if you want to call it woke 1, woke 2, or woke 3, but being too woke to call out the obvious.
Wow. Being too woke to call out the obvious. He's referring to a recent viral clip on social media, including that popular live streamer by the name of Hassan Piker, who said exactly what Joe Scarborough just relayed, that on October the 7th, when the Iranian-backed terror group Hamas flew paragliders and stormed the music festival that was taking place, killing a whole bunch of people, taking hostages, Hassan Piker recently said, I think it was either over the weekend or late last week, that we just needed to turn a blind eye to all of the atrocities that took place there. That is the Democratic Socialists of America. That is the DSA. That is this incredibly stupid push to the left that you are continuing to see by Democrats. And it falls totally on brand with all of these other issues that they have been so wrong about. I mentioned with the situation in NC-11 with Representative Jennifer Balkcom and the championing of protecting female sports. Another example of an issue like Joe Scarborough mentioned with the taxpayer-funded transition surgeries for criminals. These are the kinds of issues that Democrats remain on the wrong side of. And it's not like 60-40 wrong side. These are 80-20, 90-10, 95-5 issues that the Democrats seemingly cannot wrap their head around, are so incredibly unpopular with the vast majority of the American people. He said it earlier in the clip. They've got their head buried in the sand. And I guess that's the only way that you can wrap your head around what you're hearing. That is the only way that you can justify how a mainstream political party in the Democrat Party could be so wrong about so many of these issues, that their head is just buried in the sand and they are totally incapable of looking at the situation in front of them and determining what the best path forward is. We are listening to an interesting set of clips from Joe Scarborough's Morning Joe program that aired on MS Now yesterday, as he teed off on the Democrat Party for their potential squandering of what should be a very successful midterm election, talking about some of the issues that the Democrat Party and these more left-wing Democratic Socialists of America, or DSA members, are continuing to push. We have seen some of these very extreme candidates, to the candidates themselves and their credit, having very successful election victories over the last couple of months in a variety of Democrat primaries across the nation. And for Joe Scarborough, I think part of the reason why he's so animated and outraged, as you've already heard, is because he can see the writing on the wall. He gave the example of some of the political advertising used in 2024 that was so detrimental to Kamala Harris and the Democrat Party. These crazy, radical, stupid ideas like taxpayer-funded gender transition surgeries for convicts that the Democrats seem to think were a great idea. They could never debate that. They would never say, oh, that's not what we're doing. No, because they supported that. Those are absolutely things that Democrats wanted to support. And he brought up some other examples of things like, you want to talk about health care for all, which obviously is socialized medicine. You want to talk about making the wealthy, or the 1%, as we always hear from Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. You want to talk about them paying their fair share. Those are different conversations to have. I disagree with the Democrats on those issues, but those are at least legitimate conversations that I think most people are probably willing to engage in, at least in some way, shape, or form. The vast majority of people are not willing to engage in gender transition surgeries for convicts. They're not willing to engage in gender transition surgeries for 12, 13, 14-year-olds being done without parental permission and access. But that's what you have seen go on in the Western, in this modern move within the Democrat Party. And it's totally nuts and it's totally insane. And obviously Joe Scarborough says, hey, this stuff is a terrible idea. This stuff is incredibly stupid. And if you guys don't clean up your act, you are going to potentially change what should be a pretty consistent norm, which is the Democrat Party should have a very good midterm election this year. More from Joe Scarborough.
I swear to God, it's crazy that we're even having this conversation. If somebody says a woman being raped doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things, it's okay to call that person out and demand that candidates distance themselves from those people. If you want to rule, over a party and win elections. If somebody says going to a rally the day after Hamas slaughters more Jews than any time since the Holocaust, it's okay for Chuck Schumer. It's okay for Hakeem Jeffries to call that despicable and demand that people distance themselves from that. That's okay. So why are we bringing this up now? We're bringing this up now because it seems an awful lot like what was happening in 2024 when Democrats couldn't get out of their own way to win an election they should have won.
And that is exactly why Joe Scarborough was as outraged as he was in that clip. Joe Scarborough is a tried and true Democrat. He is an individual that wants to see Democrats in power. He is a tried and true liberal. He loves liberals in positions of power. He wants the Democrats to control Congress. He wants a Democrat he just said as much, wants them in the Oval Office. And he is staring down the barrel at the potential that Democrats break that norm, shatter that norm in what should be a very successful year for them as they continue this disastrous run to the left. And it is truly disastrous. These issues that they continue to die on the hill on, the concepts and the ideas and the policy platforms that you see out of so many of these individuals on the political left, these more radical DSA left-wing individuals, these are not palatable ideas for the vast majority of the American people. These are not concepts that most people would say, A-OK, this is the kind of stuff we love. This is the kind of stuff that we want in government. It's just not. And the polling backs this up. You can look at a variety of different political polls that have been conducted in recent months. These ideas are not very popular. They're just not. I mean, hate to be the bearer of bad news here for the Democrat Party, but this stuff just doesn't work. The vast majority of the American people reject these kinds of things. And so, as we have talked about in great detail here on the program, this ongoing civil war within the Democrat Party, I think is at kind of a breaking point right now. Because it puts people, and you heard Joe Scarborough mention the names of Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries, these high-level Democrats, Hakeem Jeffries in the House, Chuck Schumer in the Senate, they are put in this horrific situation. I'll note, which is one of their own making. I have no sympathy for them. But they're in this horrific situation where they have to straddle the line between some of the most insane, crazy, radical ideas that you've ever heard from modern politicians in the United States of America, and also at the same time try and keep regular, middle-of-the-road, moderate Democrats and unaffiliated voters on board with their message. And that is an almost unwinnable situation because the two ideas and the two blocks of voters are totally incompatible. They are incapable of coming together. You can't convince a moderate, blue dog Democrat who's been voting for the Democrat Party for the last 60 years. You can't convince that individual that it is okay for biological men to participate in female sports. It's a non-starter. You can't convince that individual that we need to seize the means of production as Democratic Socialists of America and control every private entity in the United States of America. You can't convince those individuals that we need UBI, universal basic income, where nobody works and the government just cuts you a check every single month. Those ideas are not compatible with 50 or 60 years of voting for Democrats. But ladies and gentlemen, these are the ideas of these far left progressive radicals. These are the ideas of those individuals that have pushed further and further to the left over the last couple of, you really started seeing this push over the last decade or so. These are real things. These are not made up. These are not theoretical. Many of the things that I just mentioned are in the platforms of organizations like the DSA, the Democratic Socialists of America, and they are largely incompatible with the United States of America. I don't envy the position that Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries are in. In all likelihood, this is still a midterm election year. Democrats should still have some pretty decent success. But when you hear the outrage, and I think it came across pretty well in his voice, when you hear the outrage there from Joe Scarborough, he is seeing the warning signs. And this is a guy that wants complete and total success for Democrats. Joe Scarborough is not a fence sitter. This is not a guy that has ideas for the most part that lean pretty conservative on some issue. No, this guy is a tried and true Democrat, a tried and true liberal. He sees the warning signs. He's starting to hear the alarm sounding. And he does not want to see the Democrats completely fumble the midterm elections. And so with all of this said, we are in the home stretch here. Crazy to say here in the month of August, but we're in the home stretch. These elections are going to get here before you know them. And as always, it's one thing to post on social media. It's one thing to talk privately with your friends and family. That stuff is important. You've got to get involved in this process. Get involved with your local candidates. Get involved with your local political party. Do something. Get off the sideline and get involved in this process if you want to reject these ideas that the DSA and this far left progressive wing of the Democrat Party is continuing to push. The most comprehensive election coverage will continue right here on the Nick Craig Show. All right, that's going to do it for a Tuesday edition. Thanks to the Law Group here in Wilmington for their continued support. Visit them online at lawgroupnc.com or give them a call at 910-251-6088. The Nick Craig Show, as always, streams live here weekday mornings, 7 a.m., YouTube, Rumble, X, Facebook. Available 24/7 in your favorite podcast app. And is heard weeknights, 9 to 10 p.m. on WBT Radio in Charlotte. Enjoy your Tuesday. We'll do it again tomorrow morning right here on The Nick Craig Show.